Gareth.
Okay, Chair, ready to go.
Thank you very much, Gareth. So I'll start by reading the following statement. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. If you wish to speak, can you please use the remote raise hand function? When invited to address by the chair, please could you ensure that your microphone and camera is on to ensure you can be seen and heard when actively participating. Please ensure all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. So good evening, everyone. We'll get straight into it with agenda item 1. Any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, if I give the apologies first, it's given to me. You've got Councillor Wendy Gilligan, Dr Martin Price, Lucy Barraclough and Isaac and Ellen from the Vale Youth Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Gareth. I can't see any other hands up for the time being. So in that case, we'll move on to agenda item 2 to agree the previous minutes of the meeting held on 3rd of March. If anyone's got any comments or thoughts, I'll move that. So
I was just going to second them, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That's fab. Agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interests, if there are any this evening. Councillor Asbury.
Yeah, so I have to declare an interest in item 6 because it is the head teacher of Dinas Powys Primary School making a presentation, and I'm a governor at his school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Haynes.
Also item 6, Chair. I'm a LEA governor for St Athan Primary School. It's personal non-prejudicial.
Thank you. Councillor Lynch-Wilson.
I'm a governor of St Athan Primary School as well. It's personal, not prejudicial. So I'd like to stay and speak. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks for that, everyone. So there's been a slight rejig of the order. So we'll be taking agenda item 6 next because we've got some guests coming to speak, and they'll be doing it now. And agenda item 6, so summary of Eston inspection outcomes for autumn term 24. And the update on schools is statutory follow-up. So it's over to Caris to kick us off for this one.
Dosbarth Chair, diolch yn fawr. The paper I'm presenting tonight is a paper that summarises the outcomes of Eston inspections for schools in the Vale during the autumn term 2024. And as the Chair mentioned, there'll also be an update on schools in statutory follow-up. As part of the presentation, there'll also be 2 heads speaking. So we will hear from John Paul Guy, the head teacher of Dinas Powys Primary, and James Mansfield, the head teacher of Stanwell School, who'll be talking about their experiences of an Eston inspection as well. Just to note to begin with, in terms of the Eston inspection, that a new framework was introduced in September 2024. And as a result, Eston will be engaging more regularly with schools. So during the next 6 years, between 2024 and 2030, schools will receive a core inspection and an interim visit. An interim visit is a new feature that Eston have introduced this autumn, and hence the engagement of head teachers as part of the presentation, because we'll be hearing from Dinas Powys. Dinas Powys were a pilot school for the new core inspection in the summer term. So they'll be talking about their experience of a core inspection. And you'll see from the papers that Stanwell School received an interim visit, and they'll be talking about their experience of an interim visit this term. In terms of the core inspection in the autumn term, 2 schools from the Vale of Glamorgan received a core inspection: Gwenfo Church in Wales Primary and St Athan Primary. And for those 2 schools, you will see in Appendix 1 some information about the inspection reports, information about the recommendations and the context for those recommendations. In terms of the 2 inspections, Estyn said there was no follow-up required in relation to the 2 primary schools. And in terms of Estyn with the new arrangements, when they do identify any interesting or innovative practice that's worthy of sharing, Estyn now introduce a short paragraph or a spotlight on. And you will see in terms of the reports for Gwenford Primary that there is a spotlight outlining and identifying and discussing their partnership work with the community. That's very much seen as a key strength. Moving on to interim visits, 1 school in the Vale of Glamorgan received an interim visit in the autumn term, and that was Stanwell. Very different to a core inspection where you've got a report. You will see with Stanwell and with interim visits that the school receives a letter, and there's a link to the Stanwell letter as part of the report. And I know James is going to outline some of the findings later on as well. Moving on to schools in statutory follow-up, we had 2 schools in the Vale of Glamorgan in statutory follow-up at the start of the autumn term, Ysgol Pen-y-Garth and Pencoetre. We also had Llanfair Primary in Estyn Review following their inspection in spring 2023. As was reported to Scrutiny back in December of the autumn term, Estyn have judged Pen-y-Garth to have made sufficient progress, and they've now been removed from the list of schools requiring special measures. And if you recall, Becca Pugh, the head teacher, did a presentation to Scrutiny back in March. Also, in terms of Llanfair Primary, Estyn met with leaders of Llanfair Primary in December. They also met with officers from the local authority and Central South Consortium to discuss the progress of Llanfair Primary. And they were in agreement that the school has made sufficient progress as well in relation to their recommendations. So they've also been removed from the list of schools requiring Estyn review. So in terms of schools in statutory follow-up, there remains 1 in special measures, and that's Pencoetre. And as you're aware, the Estyn monitors the school on a termly basis. We've also got a multi-agency meeting that meets on a half-termly basis. And if you recall, the head teacher of Pencoetre also discussed progress and the work undertaken, specifically in terms of leadership across the school at the scrutiny meeting in February. In terms of Estyn's engagement with the school, they undertook a monitoring visit in December, and they focused on 2 recommendations. The first looking at pupils' attendance and behaviour, and the second looking at the quality of teaching and assessment. Estyn recognised that there are now clear lines of accountability in terms of improving attendance. They also can see that there was more effective use of attendance data to plan for interventions and also for promoting good attendance. But they felt it was too early to evaluate impact, and they've also identified that there's some inconsistency in how leaders use the data in particular. Pupils' behaviour has improved at the school, and Estyn felt there was a much calmer school environment. Truancy has also been reduced in terms of internal truancy, but it does remain an area of concern. Estyn also looked at separate provisions that are now in place to support pupils with their behaviour, and that it was felt that they provide appropriate activities to regulate pupils' behaviour. But at the time of inspection, they didn't support pupils' academic progress enough. There's also, in terms of teaching and assessment, a recognition of the range of professional learning opportunities and the coaching model that's been used to support improvement across the school. Again, Estin felt it was too early back in December to evaluate the impact of those initiatives, but they remain ongoing at the school. In terms of the professional learning and in terms of the coaching, it has contributed to more purposeful routines in the school, especially in terms of the classroom and expectations for teachers. In terms of a reference in the inspection, in terms of the visit, in terms of Estin's visit, to teachers demonstrating sound subject knowledge, but there is further work to do in encouraging pupils to use subject-specific terminology. The majority of teachers plan a range of relevant and challenging activities. However, there's still further work to make sure that the teaching and the planned activities meet pupils' needs. And in the same way, there's further work to be done in relation to assessment and providing feedback for pupils to move and further improve their work. So Estin have drafted a report for the school in terms of those, outlining those thoughts, and the schools are taking those key messages on board to move things forward again. So it's something I'll come back in the summer term to give an outline of further engagement with Estin. So in terms of the actual report, I'll leave that there, and I'll now pass on to the head teachers so we can have hear about their experiences, and we'll take any questions, if that's okay, at the end of the presentations. So I'm going to pass on now to John Paul Guy, the head teacher of Dinas Powys, who's going to talk about his experiences of piloting a new core inspection framework for Estin. Diolch yn fawr, John Paul.
Diolch, Alice, thank you. I don't know if the presentation can be brought up, please. Diolch. So, as Cara said, we were part of a pilot of the Estin core inspection 10th of June last year, and our report was published on the 12th of August in the middle of the summer holidays. Next slide, please. So there's some overarching changes to the new model. So previously there were 5 inspection areas, and now there are 3. They're teaching and learning, wellbeing, care and support, and guidance, and then leading and improving. The other part to note is that the inspections themselves are shorter. So the team, as previously, arrive midday on a Monday, but previously you would have had the feedback in terms of reading the initial draft of the report on a Thursday around about 1 o'clock-ish. Now feedback is given on a Wednesday, approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the report itself is different in terms of being shorter, and I'll pick up on both of those points as I go through. So although the number of areas have changed, the actual content pretty much remains the same. It's the same things that are evaluated. Next slide, please. So numerous aspects remain the same. So there's a 2-week notification period. The composition of the team itself remains very similar. There was a reporting inspector, a team inspector, 2 peer inspectors who are both serving head teachers. On the Tuesday for the day, we had the lay inspector, whose remit was around attendance, safeguarding, healthy eating, and talking to pupil groups, such as our school council, our eco committee. The questionnaires that go out to the governing body, junior age children, parents and carers, and to staff remain. Lots of the usual information needed to be submitted to Estin via their virtual inspection room. So that's staffing, DBS lists, the school development plan, safeguarding SER. But as per the last inspection, there is no self-evaluation report that schools have to upload, as they have done in many years past. One particular interesting change is that on the Monday of the previous model, when the team arrived, there would have been a meeting at which the head teacher would probably talk about the school's improvement journey, what its priorities are. But the meeting that I had was a virtual meeting a week beforehand with the registered inspector. And for me, that replaced that Monday meeting. It was about an hour long. And we talked about some logistical things, but we also talked about the school's context, what its priorities, strengths, and areas of improvement are. And for me, that felt like the start of the inspection. So it's really important to be prepared for that. Next slide, please. So when they arrived on the Monday, there was a brief orientation tour, but then they were straight out into classrooms. Whereas previously you may have stayed in the base and examined documentation, pupils' books. And there was a great emphasis on being out in the classrooms, observing learning walks. And I did feel there was a real focus on the quality of teaching. And in fact, our recommendations orientate around quality of teaching. So Estin have progressively moved away from lesson observations where inspectors would sit in the room for long periods. And they now use a lot more of learning walks, moving in and out of classrooms, returning to classrooms. But having said that, sometimes they sat for 20 to 25 minutes in a classroom before moving on. There was quite an interesting feature, and that was a joint learning walk with my deputy head teacher. So with the reporting inspector, my deputy walked through the foundation learning and discussed the observations and judgments. The usual meetings existed with staff, with support staff. And the amount of evidence we were asked to have prepared in advance was reduced, but we actually added to that. And it was, on reflection, I was really glad we did that, because the team were receptive to us presenting evidence to challenge their initial thoughts and judgments. And so that was useful that we had that evidence base available. I felt very much that Estin have talked about them being professional experiences, supportive of the school, and I did very much feel that the team were looking to identify the positives within school. Next slide, please. And I think the reporting part is where it changes and is very different. So previously, as I mentioned, you would have had the report read to you by the Thursday, and although it would be subject to quality assurance and change, you knew roughly what was said. Now the report feedback was bullet points given initially to me as a head and then to the chair of governors and the improvement partner at 3 o'clock. So we were writing furiously to make sure we took all the notes down, because not all the feedback will appear in the report. The reporting inspector then goes away with those bullet points, away from the team, and then writes up the report. The report itself, for us, was approximately 2 pages long, and there was a further 1-page parental summary. It was interesting for me to see how, when you're trying to write a report that reflects why recommendations exist, that with 2 pages, there's not a lot of text to work with. And it'll be interesting to see how the tone of reports feels, particularly for schools where they may have a couple of recommendations. And as Carys mentioned earlier, there is a spotlight, and we had a spotlight, which you can see on the screen there, and it covers some of the interesting or effective practice we had around transition from year 2 to 3 because of our split site nature, and implementation of behaviour approaches and the impact of our attendance tracking. So there were many differences, but then there were a lot of similarities from my experience. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, John Paul, for sharing your experience of a core inspection. James Mansfield, the head of Stanwell School, will now talk about his experience and the school's experience of an interim visit. Diolch yn fawr, James.
Noswaith dda, bawb. Thank you for having us. I don't want to repeat some of what John Paul has said, but our experience of the full inspection, we can trace that back to March 22, where we were also part of a pilot inspection post the pandemic and the reopening of schools. Our experience of that was very different, actually, because inspectors hadn't been in schools for 2 years. We were sent a team of 14 inspectors, 7 of which were HMIs, who are a very experienced team. And the purpose of that pilot was to reintroduce inspectors back into schools, but also to pilot the new mechanisms by which they were going to inspect. Secondary school inspections are slightly different. They follow the same format as John Paul outlined, but obviously the number of inspectors on school site is greater, but then they have more lessons to go and observe and more staff and students to meet. So we were inspected in 22 in a full inspection. We were then, quite surprisingly actually, chosen as an interim visit 2 years later in November 24. That interim visit does have a very, very different feel to what John Paul Guy was just referring to. Even though it's a much smaller inspection of only 2 days, we had 4 inspectors on site, again, all HMIs, whereas that depends obviously on the size of the school. We have 120 teachers, therefore 4 inspectors obviously didn't get to see that much. Gareth, could I just have slide 4 up on the screen, please? Thank you. So our inspection team, not that the names will mean much to you, are very experienced. They effectively, unlike in the core inspection, the interim visit focuses specifically on the core inspection recommendations, which I'll refer to in a moment. They then give feedback to the head teacher and the senior team, and that is then followed by a short letter on the Estin website. What they do emphasise is that interim visits will not trigger an earlier core inspection. So if presumably they were to identify any concerns, they are explicit in that that will not trigger an earlier core inspection than was already planned. The next slide shows what our recommendations were in March 22. The second one in particular was around the fact that we had maintained our split lunches. So we have a situation in school where 7 have a discrete break and lunchtime to the rest of the school as part of our transition arrangements. But then 8 and 10 have a break and a lunch, and 9 and 11. What that means is that those lunch times are 30 minutes. So in March 22, in the post-pandemic period, some of the inspection team felt that that was quite short, particularly in light of some of the parent feedback that felt 30 minutes perhaps wasn't long enough. So I'll talk about what we did to address those in a moment. Recommendation 3 was around the range of opportunities to practice Welsh and questioning, which is a key focus for our school improvement plan and has been for some time, was a recommendation from that 22. So they focus on those 3 areas, and the interim visit is ultimately about how much progress you have made against those, but also what activities and strategies are in place within the school to which they can then offer a judgment. The next slide outlines the activities. So this will be dependent on the size of the school. So as I said, we have 120 teachers. They only observed 21 lessons, and by observe, they were learning walks. So the 4 inspectors were in a series of lessons, popping in and out at different points throughout the day. They had been introduced under the 22 pilot inspection. Prior to that, it was always full lesson observations. Staff are slightly unnerved by the drop-in nature of learning walks because obviously, even though the lesson started, you could be visited. I think that probably is the most unnerving aspect for classroom teachers. But we've introduced, and we had introduced, internal learning walks so that staff were fairly familiar with that. There were 2 full lesson observations, which they selected the lessons, they selected the teachers and the subjects and the year groups. What was different this time, and it was also carried through to the new pilot core inspections that John Paul just referred to, is that one of those lessons was a joint lesson observation with myself. And that really is to identify whether your observations about classroom practice is accurate, that it feeds into your self-evaluation report, and that you are accurately identifying strengths and areas for improvement. So there were 2 full lesson observations, 21 learning walks. There were then a series of interviews. The biggest difference was probably the fact that we selected the children for those interviews and the work scrutinies. The pre-visit telephone conversations with the lead inspector were very collaborative, actually, and they allowed us to select these pupils. They also allowed us to select the teachers that were on the 2 different staff panels, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then there were 4 interviews focusing predominantly on the school improvement plan, which was the only document we had to upload prior to the interim visit. As John Paul said, prior to core inspection, there's a series of documentation that has to be uploaded to the virtual room in Estin site. For an interim visit, the only documentation required from us was the school improvement plan. So those presentations were given by myself and senior colleagues, and that was a presentation outlining what we had done to address the 3 recommendations since the last inspection in 22. That then was triangulated with 2 staff panels. The first staff panel was 6 middle leaders, so heads of department in our case, and some heads of year. And then the second teacher panel, we were asked to select 6 teachers who were at different stages in their careers. So from those who have just qualified NQTs right through to those who are in either middle leader or senior leader positions. And the focus of those interviews was very much around self-evaluation activities, but also professional learning. So they were the activities that took place over the 2 days. What happens then is that on the second afternoon, by approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they then feed back to the head teacher. The 4 inspectors each take one of the recommendations, and they also discuss safeguarding procedures within the school, or they have to make an observation about safeguarding procedures within the school. And the result of that, if we could jump to slide 7, please, is that unlike the full inspection for a secondary school where we received a 14-page report in 22, my understanding is now that is slightly less, but still fairly significant, focusing on those 3 areas. Slide 8 shows you that what we have now is a 3-page letter, which provides some contextual information. It provides an outline of the activities that they followed, and then it also refers to the specific recommendations, and it either asks no questions about your recommendations. So in the case of our increasing opportunities to socialise, they had no questions for the school to reflect on, whereas you will see in the letter that they then asked a question about how do we ensure consistency of questioning across all of our schools. And then thirdly, opportunities to practice our Welsh. Sorry, that was my timer to make sure I stayed within 5 minutes. So that basically was our experience of an interim visit. It was much more collaborative, perhaps, than previous visits, and the feedback felt much more useful, actually, and supportive. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, James, for outlining the interim visit and just, giving people a flavour in terms of what's expected with this new feature in terms of Estin. So thank you to both heads, an experience of a core inspection and an interim visit. And we're happy to take any questions if anybody wants to ask anything. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks very much for that, Carys, and to John Paul and James. Really grateful for those presentations, which has given the committee a really good insight. Over to Councillor Payne.
It worked.
We've got you.
No, it doesn't.
Hello, Councillor Payne. You did come on screen then. I think you perhaps there may be a bit of a lag. You just press it once and just give it a few seconds. Press request to speak button. It should activate. There we are, Councillor Payne, we can hear you. Councillor Payne?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Carys. Diolch yn fawr. There was one thing I wanted to know, which was 2.21, which is around, I think it's pencoetry in terms of, I'll come on to two other questions about the speakers as well. Also, it was around teachers not dealing decisively with pupils' lack of engagement and low-level behaviour. And they don't use the school's behaviour management strategies appropriately. I did wonder about that. So they're saying that's around half of the teachers. So what interventions have there been around that, please, Carys?
Thank you, Councillor Payne. They've spent time introducing a new approach, a new routines to teaching. So that there's a clear structure in place, and in terms of behaviour, then there is sort of a policy in place that's been shared with schools. I think Estin felt that it wasn't being consistently applied, as you've pointed out. So the school now is going back to that and ensuring that the expectations are clear and that teachers do follow sort of the policy and expectations in place.
Well, from my perspective, reading it, it was kind of a difficult thing to monitor also, because, it's dependent on style, on the, the pupils that you have. So I'm glad to see that, it's being monitored. That's really good. Thank you, Carys.
You've also, Councillor Payne, if I can interrupt, you've also got a coach, an assistant head teacher from Whitmore is working in the school 2 days a week and is coaching staff, sort of, and is working alongside them. And as part of that coaching model, she would support teachers also to focus on management of behaviour within the classroom as well.
Lovely. Diolch yn fawr. And Chair, I had a question also for the two head teachers, please, if possible. That was around your well-being again. I always ask this question in terms of how you felt the inspection went from your perspective as a head teacher.
Hi, Councillor Payne. I think I said a little bit about the feeling that the team were coming in and it was very professional. It was felt very much that they were looking for the positives within the school. The registered inspector frequently asked me if everybody was okay, and in particular, was I okay? So I'm never going to say it was enjoyable, but but I did feel as if they were very mindful of everybody's well-being. And I can't ask for much more than that, really.
Thank you, John. Diolch yn fawr. And John? James, sorry.
Yeah, no, I would just reiterate the same, really. It is a high stakes thing. There's no disguising that fact. I think it should actually, I have no issues, with the fact that we are accountable every 6 years in terms of a core inspection. I think one of the only frustration I have as a kind of fairly new head, really, but I was the nominee in 22. There are, as you imagine, there are some slight inconsistencies with the inspectors themselves in terms of the way that they conduct things. So, for example, you will have some inspectors who will challenge you very directly. So if they feel something is not good enough in your school, you have a very, I think, useful conversation. Others are less direct in some of their observations, so we'll couch it in terms of, this is very interesting, and then by the time their feedback comes along, and as the nominee in the room, you get to hear what they say, they are perhaps slightly more negative than they are in the meetings at times. But that's inevitable by the nature of people's personalities and their confidence levels, I suppose, to challenge heads or deputies on their jobs. So in terms of the interim visit, as I said, it certainly felt very different to the core inspection back in 22. It was much more supportive. they continually, as John Paul said, asked us, to comment on the experience. The interim visits are new for them, they're new for us. And I think we felt our way through that together. Actually, that's what it felt like, much more collaborative than perhaps previous visits. So yeah, on the whole, very positive experience for us.
So there is a cultural shift, do you think? You mentioned the word collaboration. I think in previous feedback we've had, it wasn't maybe as collaborative. So that is a positive.
Yeah, I think so. But as I said, the interim visit obviously is designed to be a different feel to the core inspection, where I think there's less room for, collaboration. They told us who the two teachers were that would be seen in the full observations. But as I said, we were able to select the staff in the other interviews. I'm not sure if that was the same for the core inspection process.
Diolch yn fawr, James. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Councillor Asbury is next.
Hello. I have, if I can, a question for each person, please. The first one for John Paul. Obviously, the school is a very successful school, and it's your first inspection at Dinas Powys Primary, but it's not your first inspection, I should imagine. I'm just wondering whether it's less stressful for the staff having maybe 20-minute visits rather than the inspector staying for the full hour. I would imagine the staff would benefit from it. Did you have any feedback from the staff afterwards?
Yeah, I don't know really, because whilst when the staff are having somebody sit in the room for a prolonged period up to an hour, clearly for that period of time, you're under scrutiny and being observed. One of the things that often comes up with the learning walk style is that teachers will say things like, but they didn't see me do this bit.
Yes, yeah.
And so teachers will say, well, there was a part that came later on that I wish they had seen. And so I think that's probably the feel, is that whilst it's not such a prolonged period of scrutiny, you've got that bit where concern you may have missed something that really ties the lesson together. And equally, as James mentioned, you've got the idea that they leave and then come back. And it's anticipating someone coming through the door. Whereas once they come through the door and they're going to be there for an hour, then they're going to be with you for an hour and so on. So,
yeah. Yeah, thank you. And for James, I was just wondering about the R2. Ensure that pupils get enough time during the school day, etc., etc. I don't actually know what that means. Are they telling you to have longer breaks?
Yeah. I think that it was. I was the nominee in 22, and it was something we discussed at length, as you can imagine. It felt that not all inspectors actually felt that should have been a recommendation, but nonetheless, it was. It stemmed actually from parent surveys and pupil surveys. Year 7 obviously found it quite a shock, I think, only to have half an hour lunches. But in a big secondary school, obviously there are still challenging facilities at different times, and the alternative would be 2,000 children queuing, and it wouldn't be much of a lunch hour if it was that was the majority of their time. So what we did to address that actually was we wanted to make sure that our children had controlled time to socialise. So we've increased the amount of lessons we have from 1 to 3 in terms of PE and what we call our wellbeing lessons, where children are able to select a variety of activities that are not your conventional old-fashioned PE lessons. So we have 2 bowls courts, for example. We have a number of outdoor activities that children can do, but that is very controlled so that it reduces the chances of things like bullying or misbehaviour that can happen in very extended long lunchtimes in secondary schools. So that was how we addressed that. And as you can see, the gentleman who wrote recommendation 2 for us back in March 22, a gentleman called Kerry Jones, he looked at that this time and he offered no questions for us to reflect on that and felt that that had been addressed very successfully in the school.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, for Caris, just basically thank you for bringing people here to do presentations. It's my favourite part of the scrutiny. Thank you.
Oh, diolch yn fawr, Councillor Asby, for the comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne. Over to Councillor Campbell now.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for Carith. So when talking about Pencoitra, have Eston put a timescale on the special measures? Because we've heard about the positives and also potential areas for improvement that they still have to obtain, but have they put a timescale on what we're looking at in regards to special measures for the school?
Thank you, Councillor Campbell, for your question. In terms of timescales, we are mindful that the school has now been in special measures for over 2 years. But Eston, you've got to show that you've made sufficient progress in all of the recommendations and to be removed from that list. So at the moment, Eston are continuing to monitor on a termly basis, but and I'm speaking on behalf of the local authority here and Central South Consortium. We're seeing, sort of a strong steer. It's going in the right direction, but it does require further time to actually fully address sufficiently the Eston recommendations. But we're confident in terms of the leadership of the school and the work that's being undertaken. But further time is needed so that we can capture the impact and that practices can be embedded.
Okay, so it's a case of we get there when we get there sort of timescale.
Well, hopefully it can't continue like this forever, as you can imagine. But we're hoping now that things, there's been a significant change of direction in terms of leadership, in terms of that first recommendation now, and hopefully things will begin to move so we can have a further impact on teaching and learning in particular, and the impact on skills as well.
Okay, thank you, Carith.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I have a couple of questions. I can't see any of the hands up at the moment, but I've got a couple of questions. I'd just like to start by asking James, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned consistency of inspector observations. Obviously you pointed out that people are different and inspectors are naturally different, but is that something that you would like to see from Eston changing in future, maybe more of a uniformity in the way they approach these inspections?
Yeah, I think so. I'm of the mindset that if somebody's visiting your school and you think something is high quality or otherwise, you should be given the opportunity to defend what you think the situation is in your own school. So for those inspectors who are quite direct in some of those conversations, I personally quite like that. However, I have spoken to colleagues from other schools who have experienced some of those individuals who felt that actually it was a bit too abrasive at times and too challenge orientated. But my own view is the whole purpose is for school improvement. So it's much more useful to have that conversation than wait till the final afternoon where it kind of hits you out of the blue and then suddenly you've got to reflect and work out what you're going to do about that. So yeah, I think consistency would be helpful. Perhaps it's a bit too ambitious in the sense that, as we both just said, people are different. I think the training has been very much focused on trying to be supportive and collaborative now with head teachers. That was definitely my experience of the interim visit, and without speaking for John Paul, Guy, that kind of was alluded to in his, wasn't it? That, there seems to be a much more supportive approach to the inspection. How useful some of the reports are to parents, I think, is probably, a debate that will still be had, and I'm sure they will refine some of the reports. But I think you have to work in education sometimes to be able to identify some of the weaknesses in schools to kind of extrapolate that from some of the reports, because they've obviously removed all of the judgments that existed previously, for good or ill. So I think, yes, consistency in the reports is good. Consistency across the teams would be the desire. Whether you'll get there or not, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, James. Really appreciate the clarity. And then I also have a question for Caris regarding Pencoitra. Obviously, Helen's picked up on the point about half of teachers not dealing decisively with pupils' lack of engagement and low-level behaviour, and then not using the school behaviour management strategies appropriately. There are a few other lines in there that stood out about teachers not questioning pupils well enough, which limits opportunity for pupil engagement. And only in a minority of lessons the teachers circulate the classroom and provide purposeful verbal feedback. Now, as you said, it's been 2 years in special measures, and I appreciate you're not able to give a sort of specific timeline as for when Pencoitra will be out of special measures. But it just seems that these are quite key, core, deep-seated issues. And I know Mr. Robinson has spoken previously about techniques for improving lesson plans and management of teachers and things like that are welcome. So there are improvements which we do welcome. But I just worry that this has been dragging on for such a long time. That is there the body of staff there that is able to actually achieve these goals and get Pencoitra out of special measures, given all the criticisms that are in this report?
Thank you for your comment, Chair. In terms of Pencoitra, there has been significant improvement in terms of where they were. And yes, there are things to further improve. And that's that's part of the feedback that Estin have given them. And what the school will do now is to work with, and they are prioritising the teaching and learning to ensure, that the diet that pupils receive in the school are the best quality. So they're prioritising that. They're working closely with staff members. I referenced the coaching approach that's being used as well to make sure that the teaching is of the highest standard. So yes, there's areas for improvement, but what the school does is to take those and to focus on those in readiness for the next monitoring visit. And if you think back to where we were 12 months ago, we were in a very different situation there. If you think about the report, Estin, said there was a very calm learning environment in the school, and some of you have actually visited the school as well to have a flavour of that yourselves. So the school is going in the right direction. It just needs time for practices to further embed and to impact further on the quality of teaching and learning.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Caris. Much appreciated. I can't see any other hands up at the moment. So in that instance, then I move that we, having considered the inspection outcomes, we congratulate the 2 schools that received a core inspection with no Estin follow-up, and also Llanfair Primary on the progress made, resulting in them being removed from the list of schools requiring Estin review, and also just say thank you so much to John, Paul and James for giving up your evening to come and speak to us and give us an outline of what's going on. We really appreciate it. So if I have a seconder for that, Councillor Campbell, thank you very much. And,
Chair?
Yes.
Apologies. It's been almost a year since we went to Pencoitra. Would it be potentially able to go back again and see what improvements have been made since we went there last?
Yeah, so not Councillor Robinson, Mr. Robinson volunteered that last time he was here. I mean, we have been to Pencoitra before, so there's a couple of other schools that I'd like to go to and take committee to before we circle back on Pencoitra, but it's certainly on the list of schools to go back to, so we will be going back at some point. So thanks very much. So if I could have a seconder for those. Thanks very much, Councillor Campbell, appreciate it. And John, Paul and James, you're welcome to stick around and watch or go and enjoy your evening, but thank you very much for taking the time out. We really appreciate it. Okay then. So we're circling back to what was originally agenda item 4. So it's the Q3 revenue monitoring 24-25, which is a reference from Cabinet early this month. And it's over to Vicky. Or Gemma.
Apologies, Chair. Sorry. I'll be taking you through revenue and capital this evening. So this is the revenue position to December. So for quarter three. But I'll try and talk as well some of the prospects for Outton as I take you through the report. So there's a kind of summary report, and then there's more detail provided in the appendices 1 to 8, and the relevant appendix for this scrutiny area is Appendix 2, with Appendix 8 setting out the savings position. So unplanned use of reserves are reported as a drawdown of 12.7 million, and that represents kind of continued pressure across services, particularly in respect of schools' budget. So at this point in time, we had a number of schools projecting deficits at year end, and we were projecting deficits in the region of 5.9 million, although we felt there were some prospects to improve that figure by year end. And we have had some additional Welsh Government grants go into schools since this quarter three monitoring was prepared. So I think that's probably realistic. Additional pressures also in school transport, which reflect some of the market supply issues that we're seeing, and increased demand for additional learning needs pupils as well. We've also had some growth in pressure, so further growth in pressure in respect of children and young people services, which reflects both demand and complexity issues. There will be some mitigation because children's services have established some local residential provision and reduced number of agency staff in year. So generally, across services, we had an improvement in the position, and that was largely due to additional income and grant income in year, including the pay grant funding, which was allocated corporately and to schools, as well as services holding open some vacancies within team. And there was also some additional surplus that was recognised in respect of council tax and external borrowing costs. Now, some of that improved corporate position has been used to increase the amount of reserve set aside to offset school deficits. So members might remember that at outturn, we set aside £2 million in reserves to offset potential school deficits. And having considered the trajectory of school deficits, it was felt that it would be prudent to increase that provision by a further £2 million. That takes the total sum set aside to offset school deficits to £4 million within reserves. In terms of the savings position, performance against what is quite a challenging savings target, with approximately 77% of in-year savings achieved, is good, albeit there is some that is causing some additional pressure in year, and some of that's being offset by drawdown from the budget risk reserve. And then in terms of the analysis of reserves, we're projecting reserves in the region of 53 million at year end. So those are the main points I was going to draw out on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Over to councillors. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gemma, as ever. So I wanted to look at Appendix 2, Gemma, in terms of there's a bit about 51% of schools will outturn a deficit position by the end of the financial year. So I'm just interested in matching that with the ALN issue as well. Of those 27 schools that are in deficit position, is the majority to do with ALN needs and the additional pull it has on the budgets? That was one of the things, really. That's my main question on this part, on Appendix 2.
Councillor Payne, I'm not sure I can give you a straight answer on that question, unfortunately. I might have to take it away and liaise with the team on that. I mean, as you'll be aware, obviously the funding goes into a formula and it gets allocated. So it can also be, impacted by kind of things like falling rolls and stuff. Certainly, as kind of schools' budgets get tighter, I think additional learning needs support can be an extra pressure, and it can also be something that perhaps isn't able to be funded in full, so that, you know, there certainly is a narrative around the pressures around additional learning needs in schools. I mean, obviously looking at that data, we have a particular issue around, primary schools based on that position.
Yeah.
What I'm hopeful of is that we won't see quite so many schools in deficit at outturn, and that will be really positive because it means we can focus in on the kind of remaining schools in deficit. And obviously once the school's in deficit, they've got that kind of added pressure going into future years. But what that to a certain extent does is mask that underlying problem that we'll see going into 25-26 as well. So I think there's lots and lots of factors that are causing schools to be in deficit, but I certainly seek some further advice from the service and feed that back to you.
Okay, Gemma, just one more thing as well while I've got you. Is on the again, Appendix 2 is the Welsh for Adults contractual shortfall of 52,000. Can you just explain that to me, please?
Okay, so the council provides Welsh for Adults on behalf of Welsh Government, I think, Councillor Payne, but it's been a while since I've been in education. And there is an issue with the amount that has been agreed, I believe, and the costs of operating that service. Now, there has been some set aside in previous years to offset this potential position arising. So theoretically, historically, money has been set aside in reserves to fund this situation arising. Albeit, obviously, we have done a number of reserve reviews since funds have been set aside. So it's not necessarily that straightforward. But there has been funds set aside in previous years to make provision for the situation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Helen. Councillor Asbury, did you want to come in?
Hi, my question was similar to what Helen asked, so don't need to know. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Anne. I just had a question, Gemma, regarding school transport. So obviously the numbers, 241 routes running to mainstream and ALN locations, with 121 additional pupils compared to the previous academic year. I think we're all familiar with the difficulties around costs and increasing costs. I mean, are the council able to say that they can protect those routes for the remainder of this academic year?
I mean, certainly there's been quite a significant cost pressure set aside for 25-26, although there will still be some pressure in the service for next year, I expect, when we bring the Q1 monitoring. There's also, apologies, Chair, I'm not sure I'm quite giving you a straight answer on this either, but there's also been some significant transformation resource focused in this area. So there was a kind of coordinated school transport workshop recently to try and identify some potential initiatives that could be put in place, which brought together kind of environment and housing transport colleagues from social services, colleagues from the transformation team, and colleagues from additional learning needs as well. And there are a number of initiatives outlined as part of that workshop that are being looked at by the kind of transformation team in liaison with education and school transport. And lots of initiatives, all that will kind of be considered and looked at, and some of them were considered as to be things that the council would look to kind of move forward immediately, and others were things that were perhaps on the more into the medium term in terms of complexity. Lots of work to be done on school transport, but there's a kind of real focus in kind of addressing some of those pressures. But it really does need that kind of coordinated approach with kind of schools and the transportation colleagues and education as well.
Great. Could you give us a few examples of those ideas that are being discussed?
So something that was talked about is looking at, because we've got such significant market pressures, looking at whether that transport provision should be to a certain extent, or certain routes provided in-house using vehicles that we've already got and resource we've already got. There was talk of whether we needed some kind of panel to kind of coordinate the kind of ALN decisions with some of that kind of budget setting to make those kind of quick decisions and challenge. There's been proposals that have been put forward in the past around post 16 and what kind of charging regime will be put in place. So that no decisions were made or no proposals put forward, but a number of initiatives that are being kind of looked at again, but probably in a more coordinated way than they have before. There's all sorts of things we could look at doing around staggered starts and use of public transport as well. So potentially lots of ideas to be looked at. Obviously, some of them are more realistic than others, depending on what area you're talking about and how quickly you're looking to bring them into operation.
Okay, thank you for that, Gemma. Councillor Asbury. It might be an accidental hand, Anne.
Is that better?
There you go. We can see you now.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. I'm very interested in what you said about school transport and public transport. I've had quite a few residents in Dinas Powys contacting me about school transport to Ysgol I don't know it's relevant to this particular meeting, but it costs £450 a year for a parent to send a child from Dinas Powys to Ysgol £150 a term. That is quite a prohibitive sum of money for, I would think, most people, especially if you have 2 children or possibly more. So how can I find out more, Gemma, please, about what is going on, what discussions are taking place about school transport? Because I really do need to know a bit more about this, please.
Councillor Asprey, I mean, I think certainly it's something I think that we'd be looking to bring information forward, and whether that falls into some of the task and finish proposals that are under the new Scrutiny proposals, I'm not sure, but we could certainly, I could certainly take your specific concerns away. I mean, I think those costs are broadly on a contribution to cost basis. School transport is very, very expensive. I mean, you only have to look at the kind of pressures that have gone into the service in recent years, but partly that's because there's so few operators in the market. There were limited operators anyway, and certainly some of those operators left the market during COVID, and we've seen, significant number of inflationary pressures there. So I don't think it's a position in terms of high sums are being charged.
Can I interrupt there? That's not my point. The officer that I've been dealing with in the Vale has been extremely helpful.
Oh, good.
At the moment, although I think £450 is prohibitive, I'm not blaming the Vale for that. All I'm saying is I'd like to know more about what is happening. I really do need to be involved in it, please. That's all. I need information.
Okay, Councillor, so if I could initially provide a summary to members, but I suppose if a future report is brought, I can liaise with officers on that as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne and Gemma. I can't see any more hands up, so in that instance, then I move that we note the reports, the Q3 revenue monitoring report, and refer comments made today back to Cabinet. If I could have a seconder for that, please. Councillor Hennessy, diolch yn fawr iawn. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 31st of December 24, and it's Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So at Q3, the approved programme totalled just short of £90 million, which includes some slippage into 24-25. However, the revised forecast outturn was reduced to £80 million, just over £80 million, and the spend to the end of December was around £39 million. So whilst we are expecting some slippage to outturn, there was quite a lot of spend to hit the ledger between December and year end. the Appendix 1 sets out the kind of financial programme and the capital programme, and Appendix 2 shows the changes on the approved budget, so that will set out some of the slippage and additions. In terms of overspends and slippage, so we've got just short of £9 million of slippage requested in the Q3 monitoring, but only 75,000 of that slippage relates to learning and skills schemes. In terms of some of those requests for amendments, the schemes I would highlight are carry forwards for Jenner Primary relating to external doors and window refurbishment, phase 1, and that's £25,000. Some carry forward for Victorian Schools replacement of residual cast iron rainwater goods of £30,000, and at Jenner Primary brickwork repairs and damp treatments of £20,000. And all of that is because the schemes need to be carried out during the summer holidays, and therefore they need to be planned for summer 2025. And those are the main points on that report, but happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Gemma. So over to councillors, if there are any questions, statements, comments, thoughts. I can't see any hands up at the moment, Gemma, but obviously there's a very broad range of projects there. It's just a general question from me about how does the council ensure value for money and efficiency in spending on such a variety of projects?
Chair, I mean, I think procurement is, and obviously we've recently introduced the kind of updated requirements for the new upcoming Procurement Act. So the property team who probably manage the majority of the learning and skills scheme, other than the Sustainable Communities for Learning, are kind of really well versed in that kind of tendering process. A very kind of keen eye in the market and follow that kind of delegated authority process in terms of tender awards and things like that really keenly, posting kind of awards on Sell to Wales. And a real kind of interest in maximising the amount of asset renewal schemes that they're able to deliver within the funding envelope. And obviously in terms of the arrangements around Sustainable Communities for Learning, that's very rigorous, albeit those schemes can have obviously emerging issues that can affect costs quite significantly, but go through a number of business cases and quite a rigorous procurement process as well. Hopefully that gives you a broad overview, but happy to take any kind of specific concerns away if that's helpful.
No, that's great, Gemma. It's just a general query. Because obviously, there's such a broad range of projects that you've outlined there, and obviously there's lots of different projects going on. So just was happy to receive a general overview on that. So thanks very much, Gemma. Much appreciated. I can't see any other hands up. So in that case, I move that we note the report. If I could have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Hennessy, and thank you to Gemma. Okay then, agenda item 7 is the Learning and Skills Directorate Plan 25-26. Julia.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. It's a bit glitchy my end, so I just want to make sure you can all hear me before I start.
We can.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to talk you through the directorate planning process and the directorate plan tonight. So I'll set the context first by saying that the business planning cycle this year has coincided with the development of a new corporate plan for the Vale, which is called Vale 2030. As you may already be aware, it was approved by Council on the 10th of March to cover the period 2025 to 2030. Vale 2030, the corporate plan, is a key means through which our statutory obligations under the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021 and the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act 2015. And it also directly informs the Council's key annual plans and the corporate framework of performance measures and its associated targets that enable us then to demonstrate the progress we are making in achieving our corporate plan commitments. As part of developing these new performance arrangements to support delivery of the Vale 2030 commitments and outcomes, business planning has been undertaken in a slightly different way to further enhance how we integrate our approach to corporate planning and better align more closely with the Council's annual self-assessment process and also budget setting processes. So now there's currently 5 directorate plans, which are a key element of the new arrangements. These now replace 15 annual service plans that you would have previously been aware of. A new annual statement will also be developed for the Council, and this will be informed by the Council's annual self-assessment findings, its directorate plans, as well as resident voice and political priorities, and it will be a statement and not a detailed plan going forward. So this year, the scrutiny committees are considering the new directorate plans. This has enabled the Council to take account for the recommendations that have come out of the recent panel performance assessment to inform the development of the Vale 2030 corporate plan and associated performance management arrangements. The approach to presenting the directorate plans for scrutiny is similar to that approach taken for scrutiny of the budget and the medium-term financial plan proposals. So directorate plans are being reported to the committee where there's the greatest alignment, and all plans are included in background papers this evening for you to view anyway. Comments from all scrutiny committees will need to be referred to the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee to inform almost like a composite reference to Cabinet for all the directorate plans going forward. So some key issues for consideration tonight. So the 5 annual directorate plans now replace the 15 service plans as mentioned. Each plan details the directorate level contributions to the wellbeing objectives and associated commitments within the Vale 2030 plan. And the directorate plan I'll be presenting to you tonight is the Learning and Skills plan. The directorate plans are also a key means through which performance for Vale 2030 is monitored and measured, and progressing the activities and associated performance targets detailed within the directorate plan will enable us to meet our wellbeing objectives and contribute to the national goals. The Learning Skills Direct Plan 25-26 is the primary plan that aligns to this committee's remit tonight, and we outline and present the kind of planned activities, performance measures and associated performance targets for 25-26. All directorate plans are obviously, as I mentioned, including your background papers as well for you to view, should you wish to. The draft directorate plans have been subject to a moderation process, initially by members of the Strategy and Insight Advisory Group and then by the Chief Executive with all 5 directors to ensure there is a good coverage of activities at the right level and that will contribute to our achievement of the Vale 2030 commitments and outcomes. Additionally, it's ensured that there is a relevant suite of performance measures which also cover service outcomes, user and citizen perspectives in place to enable us to demonstrate progress throughout the year. And also relevant Cabinet members have also had oversight of all the directorate plans prior to presenting to Scrutiny Committee. So if I just briefly outline to you the directorate plan sections to you, there's 5 sections in the directorate plan in total. There's a section on who we are and what we do. This provides you with a brief overview of the directorate and its broad functions. The purpose of our directorate sets out how the directorate will contribute towards delivery of the Council's priorities as aligned to the Corporate Plan 2530 and provides almost a plan on a page summary of its contributions to the wellbeing objectives and outcomes. The 3rd section within the plan refers to managing our resources to deliver our priorities and provides you with an overview of the directorate's budget, including the reshaping, efficiency and income targets, and also outlines the key areas of focus being taken forward by the directorate. In the case of the Learning Skills Directorate Plan, service delivery is supported by an estimated base budget of 142.11 million for 25-26. This incorporates funding awarded as part of the directorate's pay pressures of 9.63 million, and as well as inflation pressures and other service cost pressures of 1.72 million. The directorate is committed to delivering 1.712 million of its in-year savings as identified for the 25-26 period, and 512,000 relates to tactical savings within the directorate. Some of these tactical savings include 5% cuts to the resource-based budgets, removal of an early years provision budget, review of a sensory team level of provision, and reduction in CSE contributions, and also reduction in out-of-school tuition service. Section 4 of the directorate plan involves engagement and insight sections. This provides you with an overview of key engagement activities that are planned during the period. It provides you with a summary of what these engagement activities are, and Some of them include things such as the Library Service Survey, the Learn Welsh in the Vale Evaluation Engagement Activity, engagement on the concept of design of St Richard Gwyn, the Make Your Mark consultation, and youth engagement as part of the wider placemaking consultations as well. In terms of the risks, there's a risk section within the Directorate Plan. This section articulates and assesses current risks identified by the Directorate. The Directorate is the risk owner of one main corporate risk in relation to ALN. This continues to be a risk that is escalating with the highest possible score of 16. The risk landscape continues to be volatile around this particular risk. This elevation in the ALN risk score reflects the increasingly challenging circumstances that the local authority is operating in the current risk climate. Despite the local authority investing heavily in resource around ALN provision and putting in place a raft of mitigations to tackle the exponential growth in demand and expectation around the Act, it is having a limited impact on the ability to fully mitigate against the capacity of demand pressures facing ALN and the new ways of working associated with the Act. Many of the issues remain outside of our immediate control, which requires a whole Wales approach in terms of how this is addressed. And in addition to this, the corporate risk, there are also a number of the service risks that have also been identified across the Directorate Plan that cover several risk areas such as capacity, resources, addressing absenteeism and exclusions across our schools, the risks associated with raising standards in educational attainment, risks associated with new school improvement model and school budgetary deficits. The risk assessment in the Directorate Plan also highlights risks with insufficiency in funding in relation to the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme and our asset renewal schemes, the Welsh Language Bill, and capacity to realise savings and generate income and barriers to data sharing. The next section within the Directorate Plan refers to what we're actually going to deliver in 25-26. This sets out our proposed actions detailed within the Directorate Plan to support our achievements of the commitments and outcomes aligned to the 5 wellbeing objectives within Vale 2030. And it's also reflective of the Directorate's key improvement priorities. So in terms of the key actions identified for the forthcoming year, these include a focus on maximising our use of data insight to enable our schools to better interrogate and use their data to plan for improvements, to raise attendance, engagement and outcomes for all learners. The Directorate is also focusing on embedding a whole local authority approach to how schools improve the high quality teaching and learning and adapt provision where needed, and implement mechanisms to enhance additionality at the earliest opportunities to ultimately improve the outcomes for all our learners. This will involve reviewing our practice around teaching and learning and differentiation, and on sharing and facilitating good practice and cluster-based working approaches. A key development in the forthcoming year will also be on defining our new model for school-to-school working and the middle tier to drive improvement in the quality of teaching and learning. The intention is to have a new model in place by September, and the Directorate will also be focusing on developing its strategic approach to enhancing the performance of all learners, but with a particular emphasis on EFSM. Recently, outcomes data continues to show narrowing the gap needs to be an area of focus, particularly with our EFSM learners. Linked to the pressures facing ALN, a key area of emphasis will be on developing a strategic approach to building capacity to address ALN disputes at the earliest opportunity. The focus of this action is in part to enhance capacity of our schools to meet the needs of ALN at the earliest opportunity, whilst also focus on building capacity to meet the growth in SEMH needs and communicating effectively with our schools and our parents and carers. Another key action going forward will be about defining our model for community-focused schools in the Vale to drive improvement in standards and also have a contribution towards tackling poverty. In response to the changing economic climate, the Directorate will also be linking in with the placemaking agenda and defining its arts and culture operating model to support income generation opportunities and widening access to service delivery of a more sustainable footing. A key focus for the Directorate is also on progressing its transformation programme to support schools to reduce their deficits, to deliver more sustainable and economically viable programmes to deliver improvement for our learners. A link to this action is another Directorate Plan activity that focuses on the development of our governance and operating models to contribute to that whole authority transformation approach to its strategy and to embed challenge through our work. This will be looking at our contributions towards things like reshaping school transport, implementing a new MIS system across the Directorate, and expanding use and take-up of HUB across all schools, as well as identify other opportunities and communicate these with other directorates to facilitate transformation projects. A core focus will also be taking action on establishing a vision for specialist provision to ensure we can embed a sustainable approach to meeting growth in demand and changing needs. This will require a review of the existing model of specialist provision and identifying and evaluating alternative service models. The Directorate will progress its work on exploring alternative delivery models for community learning, culture and library service to complement our priority on raising standards of literacy across schools and to ensure services are sustainable both now and in the future. With regards to sustainable communities for learning, this remains an area of development this year, with the focus being on progressing Cyndaru, St Richard Gwyn and Yolwyn sites. The Directorate also intends to develop its strategy with schools, FEIs and HEIs and the business community to ensure young people have the right skills for employment. This will focus on developing a strategy that where we take collective ownership. The Directorate will also continue to focus on promoting the school councils and youth council as a platform to increase engagement and inform and shape decision making. And finally, the Directorate intends to build on its work as part of the West delivery through implementation of its action plan to meet our commitments to increase the number of Welsh learners and speakers across our work, schools and communities. And the next section of the actual Directorate plan was about how we measure our success. This particular section outlines the Directorate's key performance indicators and proposed targets for the forthcoming year, as aligned to our Directorate priorities and the Council's wellbeing objectives. This includes a mixture of service user, citizen perspective measures and service outcome measures that will enable the Directorate to demonstrate progress over the year towards its identified priorities and the Vale 2030 plan. The proposed measures and targets within the Learning Skills Directorate Plan have been informed by an assessment of performance trend data, performance against previous targets. All targets have been commensurate with the available level of resource, and performance targets have been set for the existing performance indicators that are continuing into 25-26, where it's appropriate to do so. Any new performance indicators will involve establishing the baseline performance for 25-26. Some indicators to note within our plan within learning and skills is a focus on persistent absence. This is a key measurement metric for us. We've set a challenging target of 20%, focus on measuring attendance and exclusions across primaries and secondaries continues to be a metric within the Directorate plan going forward, as well as measuring NEET levels across years 11, 12 and 13. This continues to be a priority with ambitious targets set in keeping with our previous performance and the Welsh average. We continue to measure outcomes of learners leaving compulsory education, as well as measuring the improved CAP9 average point score, which measures attainment at the end of year 11 across our Vale schools, where the average point score of learners for the top 10 subjects includes literacy, numeracy and science. We will also be looking at measuring take-up of the Welsh language and transfers of learners from the Welsh medium primary to Welsh medium secondary. There are also a handful of new measures that will be reported that include apprentices created per 1 million invested through the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, and we'll also be measuring the positive impact on health and wellbeing of both our young people and adults who participate in learning activities, as well as some others that are outlined within the Directorate plan. In terms of actions for tonight, Scrutiny Committee members asked to review and endorse the Learning Skills Directorate Plan and associated measures and performance targets for 25-26, which are also contained within the plan, and refer their endorsement and any views to the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee in order for a composite response to be developed and referred back to Cabinet for the 1st of May. That's the end of what I was going to present tonight. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that presentation and report, Julia. So over to councillors now. Councillor Payne to kick us off.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for that. There's a lot of work involved in compiling this information. I'm interested in page 9, which is the Art Central in Barry. You're looking at a feasibility study in Q2, but you're also looking at building a cultural community network. So are you going to tie in those two areas? And I wanted to know about, in terms of methods of engagement with people who are not only interested in the arts and culture, but people who might also be on the margins. So is this something that's going to be considered in terms of Art Central? Thanks.
I might pass that over to Trevor if that's okay, because my knowledge is a bit more limited than, well, definitely more limited than his will be.
Thanks.
Trevor, you may be muted. Sorry, Chair, we're obviously having issues with Trevor at the moment. Should we come back to Trevor later and perhaps take some other queries first?
Yeah. Thanks, Gareth. We'll circle back on Helen and Trevor. I won't forget. We'll come back to that in a minute. So Councillor Marshalsea is next.
Thanks, Ruth. Just a question about the 5% cut to resource budgets. Obviously, this is going to have quite an effect on attendance. I hope not. And I was wondering if you could fill me in on the reasoning behind this, because obviously resource budgets, resource attendance, is low. And I was just concerned about that in general with a cut to that budget.
I think when this was looked at, this was considered in the context of all those factors that could impact on it. It was felt that 5% was doable, and that was done in conversation, obviously, with relevant individuals as well, to make sure that it's a managed cut in terms of how we mitigate and reduce any potential negative impact it would have. I agree with you. Attendance is always an issue when you've got any form of provision, specialist provision. But we were doing it mindfully in the context of understanding the requirements to try and find those savings, but also with minimal impact on the service ultimately.
Thank you. I've got two other questions, if that's okay. Sorry, Julie. I was just wondering, there's obviously a lot on promoting Welsh language, particularly in schools. And I was just wondering how school staff are encouraged to take part in Welsh lessons. Particularly, is there a possibility of it sort of within school hours? I know it's difficult with staff and people being out of class, but is that a possibility?
Yeah, so currently the offer that's available, there is the opportunity to do sessions, I believe, outside of the working day hours. There's the flexibility around that for staffing. I haven't got any figures for you, I'm afraid, in terms of numbers of teachers that have taken up any offer. That's something, if you would like me to go away and find out, I'm happy to look
support
at that.
Staff as well.
And support, yeah, that's fine. I'll speak to relevant officers, see if I can get some data for you on that. But I'm not sure if maybe Caris, if she's still on the call, whether she has anything she can feed in around professional learning to encourage, obviously, staff and schools to become Welsh learners themselves.
That's right, Councillor Marshalsea. At Central South Consortium, there is a planned programme of professional learning available to support staff in terms of their Welsh. It's actually based on the school workforce census. So there's a census that's undertaken on an annual basis in terms of looking at the competency of people's Welsh skills. And then there is a programme in place aligned to the level of Welsh. So that programme is is offered on a termly timely basis, and there's actually a programme just out now for the summer term. We also at Central South Consortium provide specific training for learning support assistants. So if there's any, that's something we've done on a school level, but we've also done on a cluster level as well. So that would be specific to need. And in terms of to address key areas of sort of development and the skills that they need. But that offer is available for English medium schools, but there's also what we call Gloywi Iaith for Welsh medium schools, where you've got teachers who want to brush up, if you want, on their level of Welsh. So that offer is there as well. But obviously, in terms of school improvement, that's for the summer term. I'm unsure how it will continue from sort of the autumn term onwards, but I'm sure there will be some sort of provision available. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Thank you. I've still got one more question. I'm sorry. My last question is, it was really good to hear about schools signing up to be schools of sanctuary. I was wondering if within this directorate plan, there could also be information on schools signing up to be active travel schools.
Although it's not mentioned directly within this directorate plan, because I think the way we needed to cut our cloth this year was very much setting out an ambitious plan that we knew was realistic and achievable within the current kind of pressures we're facing financially as a local authority. That's notwithstanding the fact that active travel still remains a key focus, particularly when you think about Project Zero. I think the way this could be picked up potentially would be through team plan level activities and conversations obviously we have with schools already. This was, the actions in this were very more strategic high level actions as an area of focus, but that's not to say that some of that activities not continuing to happen on the ground. Does that kind of help and make sense?
Yeah, it would just be good to know sort of percentages across the Vale really of pupils travelling actively to school at some point.
Yeah. Again, I can, although not directly listed as an area of activity this forthcoming year, I can go and find some figures for you to see if I can report something back and see how it's currently, what I don't know is how it's currently collected, but I will go away and try and find out some, is it primary and secondary?
It's obviously within the plan, there's lots on mental health, there's lots on obesity, there's lots of everything that active travel can support. So I kind of feel we should be trying to focus on the positive way of making those changes as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks,
I'll
Julia.
go in, I can find out for you.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's it, really. Sorry about all my questions, everyone.
That's okay. Thanks for that, Naomi. So it's Councillor Ewan Goodjohn next.
Thank you, Chair, and no need to apologise, Councillor Marshalsea. I think I may have more than you, actually. First off, if I may, Chair, for the Director, if possible, but obviously anyone else is welcome to come in, I wanted to ask about Action 5 on ALN support. Councillor Marshalsea mentioned the cuts to resource base. However, there's also been cost pressures awarded, so additional money going into ALN for the new ALN support centres. You say that there's no additional resource coming in for the ALN plan. You're saying you're going to write a strategy that you're going to communicate with young people, carers, parents, etc. I wonder if a strategy, as you say, is probably the right way to go about this. I wonder if that's the best objective to have as part of the action, because the implementation date for the ALN Act, I believe, is in September, if I'm not mistaken, to finish off implementation. And we still have this as the highest risk within the entire local authority is the implementation of the ALN Act. So I'd like some more information, really, as to what specific actions is going to be taken, either as part of the strategy or outside of it, to ensure that we mitigate the risk, yes, support disabled pupils, and make sure that the ALN Act is properly implemented by the local authority.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. What we will be focusing on and putting a considerable effort over the next couple of years, actually, is how do we stem the flow? We do have considerable additional specialist resources and we are confident that we have the right sort of provision. But what we are concerned about is the growth in need that's coming through. So we do need to work with our schools to make sure that every single teacher is confident and competent in meeting the majority of needs for nearly all of our learners. There will always be a need to make sure that we have specialist resource spaces when we need them. But it's also reasonable also to expect children with ALN to expect to be taught within their local mainstream schools, wherever that is possible. Hence the dedication to looking at building teacher confidence and competence. So we do have a new strategic approach to looking at things. Whilst we will always continue to support the need for specialist additional provision, we need to be moving to a more preventative agenda if we can. We have recently been working with the Education Endowment Foundation, and we've made some early inroads into looking at how can we harness the information that's already out there, or the research that's already out there, in terms of what works for our ALN children in mainstream classes. Again, I'm not for a minute saying that we shouldn't be investing in specialist resource spaces. What I'm saying is there's a need to also look at the same time to see if we can at least address, if we can stem the flow of children going on to need ALN specialist support. So we intend, and again, these are very early thoughts, but our intention is to work with our head teachers to formulate a plan of action around this, which will in turn lead to us working with leads in each schools, leads for teaching and learning, and we will be focusing on what does that need to look like for our children in mainstream settings. Hopefully we'll get to a position where we are confident in what we think is reasonable to expect all schools to provide, so that we can again make sure that our parents and our children can be reassured about the support that is available for all of our children at all times, irrespective of whatever lesson you have or whatever teacher you have, so that there is, again, a better understanding and continuity across all of our mainstream schools. Does that at least answer initially some of the question, Councillor Goodjohn?
Yes, thank you, Director. I would say it's really good to hear that we don't let a good crisis go to waste, and that we are thinking about preventative support for pupils all the way through this. And my point would be definitely to say that if you need additional resources, non-financial resources from the organisation as a whole to speak up, not just at Scrutiny, but internally to say, because I think this strategy this plan of action needs to come forward as quickly as is humanly possible. So if resources at any point a buffer from that happening, I think that needs to be shouted from the rooftops at a senior level. So that'd be my point on that. If I can ask any officer who's willing to take it on, we set an ambitious corporate plan, which this plan is part of realising, including improving health outcomes for our young people, which I think is absolutely right, and reducing obesity. So I'd be interested as to the thoughts as to why there's nowhere in the plan about health outcomes and healthy eating, and improving our teaching within our schools of more basic life skills, and support for especially children in poverty. I'm thinking of people in my ward in Cadoxton, to try and improve health outcomes through exercise and healthy eating teaching. Anyone's welcome to come in on that if they feel brave.
Trevor, do you want to take it or me?
Oh, I love being brave. And my stuff is working now, so I can answer the question we had earlier a little bit later on. I guess part of the answer to that question is a lot of the stuff you've referenced is our bread and butter stuff. It's stuff we do on a regular basis. So things like healthy eating, for example, form part and parcel of everything we do with Big Fresh, our LATC, and all of the work we've spearheaded in terms of healthy eating in schools, Welsh Government's new regulations around some of that stuff. And some of the initiatives we've been able to sponsor across our schools and clusters around healthy living and activities. So the programs we run, for example, the School Holiday Enrichment Program or Food and Fun, the Joe Ledley football camps that we've worked in previously, those sorts of events we do as part of our day-to-day work. We're also doing quite a bit of work around our community-focused schools, and this is for supporting communities across every school in the Vale. We have pockets of deprivation in every single one of our schools across the Vale. And there's been a considerable amount of work that's happened over the past 6 to 12 months around assessing where we have areas of best practice and how we build on that to support our communities, and signposting to those parts of the organization who are best placed to deliver some of those things, whether it be the play team or adult and community learning or some of the community groups that we work with. A lot of the active travel and healthy living stuff is also built into everything we do around the Sustainable Communities for Learning program. So if you look at the investment strategy we have for schools, active travel, healthy and active living forms a big part of that. So in terms of how we design our schools and how we design things with the planners and the areas outside and around our schools as well. So yeah, in short, a lot of that is the bread and butter stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis, which is probably why it doesn't feature as an exception in terms of the report in front of you.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm going to double check with the chair that I'm okay for time because I have 2 more questions, if I may.
Yeah, that's okay, Ewan.
Thank you so much, Chair, for your indulgence. I wanted to ask about apprenticeships because we have, as part of a corporate plan and as part of a performance indicator, the increase in apprenticeships that come from the plan and from the Sustainable Communities for Learning scheme, as was previously mentioned. I wondered if there could be any working within the local authority to promote apprenticeships that this local authority creates within itself, and promoting them to older pupils within sixth forms and colleges to make them aware of the opportunities available, and trying to encourage as many local people, to take up jobs within the local authority as possible, and linking in with the corporate side of the organisation to make sure that we bring in as many kids, especially from deprived backgrounds, as possible, into making sure that they take every opportunity they have here, and trying to stem the brain drain that we have at the moment in Wales. Anyone's welcome to come in on that. Any officer be interested if there's any work that's already going on, or if there's anything that could be included. Thank you, Trevor.
That's okay. That's right. Yeah, there's some really exciting work going on at the moment. So in a couple of different streams. So you mentioned Sustainable Communities for Learning. You'll see in some of the benefits realization reports that we have as part of our tendering process, some of the work that we expect from some of our suppliers in terms of creating those opportunities for young people, as well as the work that they do inside the school. So to teach them about, sense of place work, or to give them experience of what it means to be a contractor or a designer or an architect, to feed that curiosity in our schools, and then to provide those opportunities in the field, which is really, really exciting. On the other side of the coin, we've got programs like our Communities for Work scheme, and we've got internal programs like our Quick Start scheme. So, and I say this very, very genuinely, some of the best new employees that we've had have been as a consequence of that internal program we have of finding young people, playing to their talents and creating opportunities for them to shine and to teach us something new. And many of these folks have gone on to become longer term employees of the council, which has been fantastic. You've got roles like that to thank for some of the ICT support in our schools, and for some of the arts and culture work and some of the growth we've seen in that area over the past few months. So that's a really exciting scheme. We've had lots and lots of conversations with our schools, especially our Welsh Medium Secondary School, for exactly the reason you articulated around how do we get some of those young folks interested in some of the gaps that we have? So Welsh language being a really big one. We need to grow our ability to work and communicate and develop things within the Welsh language. And we grow our own in that sense with Welsh medium education. So we've been doing a lot of work with the schools and with my colleagues in HR, for example, looking at where are some of the grant funding we can get from the Open University, for example, through the OEU. Through Welsh Government to fund some learning for these kids once they've finished their time in high school and looking at that civic duty and working with us to make better communities going forward. So that's really exciting and encouraging going forward. So there is lots of stuff happening in the background, and I'm hoping one day in the near future we'll bring you a report on that side of the business and talk about some of those initiatives, because I'm sure you'd be really interested to hear about them.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. I think my comments on both of those are very similar. I would look for, if possible, finding more performance indicators to include around health outcomes for kids specifically, and how our strategies at the moment are being implemented and how effective that's been. And also on apprenticeships, I'd love to see some more information as part of the performance evaluation as to what Trevor has said right there, of bringing kids directly from our college and colleges and our sixth forms directly into the workplace to make sure and also, if possible, linking in with Strive to avoid NEET young adults. That's a huge amount of fantastic work that goes in there, and being able to evaluate and measure that year on year would be really interesting, if at all possible. And my final thing would be on the youth service and Action 15. I think it's extremely important that we promote school councils and the youth council. Of course, I would say that, of course, but at the end of the day, engagement with young people is absolutely vital to knowing what kind of environment they're looking for healthy learning. And I think that there's been an enormous amount of good that's come from this, not only in the past, but very recently for officers and councillors alike. I do wonder, though, if we could be more ambitious when it comes to this action, because a lot of it is things that we already do as part of the youth council and part of school councils. I wonder if we could focus more on actively engaging with schools. And one thing I'd love to do is to do a roadshow with the youth service in going into schools and asking directly kids who would have no engagement with school councils, otherwise no engagement whatsoever with the council, what they're looking for when it comes to education, what they're looking for when it comes to a public body like us, and try and encourage them to be more engaged, because their voice very much does matter. And often with school councils, it's such a shame that such a few voices are ending up being the ones that listen to, and it's often those with the least confidence, and often those that are the most privileged, for better or worse, that are the ones that are listened to, because they're the ones that shout the loudest. So I wonder if there's any room for an increased ambition, especially in the current context when grant funding is struggling at the moment, because there's uncertainty in the service because it's so much of it is grant funded now. So I'd be really interested to hear your response.
If you don't mind, I'll have a go at answering that, Councillor Goodjohn. Marwen isn't here today, and she would probably be able to give you maybe more of a comprehensive answer. What's in our corporate plan is an attempt to become more systemic and systematic in how we go about harnessing our youth service and youth council then. And we do have a really valuable resource that is used well in certain circumstances, but its full reach hasn't actually been actualised yet. So what we're going to try and do is make far better use of what we have, and to make explicit links with all of the other directorates, schools included, mind you, because I do absolutely agree with you that there are times where we miss really important voices that are maybe harder to reach. So we need to make much more of an effort in having more of a systematic and strategic approach to gathering that. But nevertheless, it is ambitious in that we're going to make far more explicit links so that what we have is used more effectively and across all directorates in the council. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say, I totally agree. I just wish there was more that we could do. Perhaps that requires more resources. Again, I don't know if we can do everything. That's my last comment. I don't know if we can do everything within the resources we have, and some reprioritization might be needed in future. So thank you so much for indulging me, and those all of the officers, thank you so much for dealing with my questions.
Thanks very much, Ewan. Over to Councillor Emma Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is the plan is really ambitious, and it does link to some things that have been previously said. I have some questions regarding child poverty, specifically what more we can do towards providing a more equitable education between schools across the Vale, specifically to tackle child poverty. I also wondered what more we could do. You were talking about providing affordable access to participate in leisure, sport, culture and heritage. And I wondered what more we can do to provide that.
Thank you, Councillor. I suppose what this plan needs to be read in context with is all the other directorate plans, so it forms like that jigsaw piece when it's all put back together. It's a very holistic plan that cuts across multiple elements of the Vale 2030. So when you read this, you almost need to read in the context of the 4 other directorate plans to see what the contributions are around poverty there as well, to get that bigger picture, if that makes sense. So from the learning skills perspective within the directorate plan, we've linked in the work we're doing around community focused schools although its fundamental focus is around improving kind of standards and quality of teaching and learning experiences, there's also part of it has a contribution around tackling poverty as well, because it's taking that whole school approach to how we look at community-focused schools, and part of that obviously links in with the poverty agenda. So that's kind of where the focus comes in from the learning skills perspective, but there's obviously quite a lot of stuff that Trevor's already highlighted that goes on across our schools, which is more the bread and butter around tackling things around poverty. So the enrichment programme that was mentioned earlier is an example of that. So that although that's not highlighted within this directorate plan because it's more of our bread and butter than the ambitious kind of actions in order to address our improvement priorities linked to our self-assessment. But also I'm aware across other service areas there's work going on around access. You mentioned around sports and physical activities. I know there's some pilot work happening currently across kind of the play teams to try and bring kind of play activities back onto the schoolyards out of hours. That's a piece of work that's being looked at the moment. So although not necessarily referenced specific within this learning skills directorate plan, there's other plans that contribute around that in a wider sense. Is that going to help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Definitely. And I look forward to that coming to fruition and seeing how that plays out. I was also just one more question, and it was to do with access to examination and qualification. I know there is talk of apprenticeship and work base, but I wondered what we are doing to make sure that all people or young people across the Vale, specifically to do for home education, are going to have access to exams and qualifications, please.
I don't know if Liz is maybe best placed to deal with that question, or possibly Trevor, but there is some access that's arranged, I believe, through, was it YMCA, Liz?
Yeah, could Marwan's not on the call tonight. Can we just get back to you on that one and let you know what's happening around that?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thanks, Liz. I just love to know if that's continuing and how that will go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Lynch-Wilson.
Thank you for a very interesting report. I was glad to hear the Open University mentioned and community. I'm on a consultation panel with the Open University specifically for lifelong learning and not leaving people behind, and how you raise the literacy and numeracy of adults, which impacts on the children. Also with community, with poverty. There's, you know, with our recent fire at St Athan Primary, the community have stepped up, and I think we don't realise how much we rely on community to help us in our, you know, in our schools. Just parents going in to help read, etc., etc. So, and how our schools are safe places for children. I mean, I know some children who probably the breakfast club and school dinner are the only things that they have in a day. So I just feel we need to keep an eye on things that are going on and just keep up the good work, especially ALN, etc. I mean, that's come on in leaps and bounds, and I'd hate to see it go backwards in any way. I'm old enough to know when, you know, people of my age, if they had any educational needs, they used to go in the greenhouse in school, and that's what they used to do. They used to grow things for the school garden. So yeah, things have come on, and long may it continue. Thank you for your report.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that, Julie. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I've been very patient. Waiting for come back to Trevor, please. So, Trevor, my point was about the Arts Central Gallery and the feasibility study, building of a cultural community network, and in terms of reaching those people who would not normally engage with the arts and cultural activities. So I wanted to know a little bit about that, please, Trevor.
Well, hey, it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a ton of work that's happening in the arts and culture space, and the name of the game there is around widening access to what we have and making it as accessible to as many people as we can around the Vale. The feasibility study is looking at what we can do with the courtyard area between the library and Arts Central to bring more diversity in terms of the types of stuff that we have on offer in the gallery, to bring in new audiences and to link in with our schools and to link in with our community production groups and all kinds of different things like that. That's a really exciting piece of work. And we're doing something similar at the moment with Old Hall down in Cowbridge. And, you know, it kind of replicates what we've done at the Penarth Pier Pavilion, which if you talk about widening access and you look at the numbers through the door of some of the events there, you know, not only has it been a massive growth in terms of people who are accessing it, but for the artists as well, as a mechanism for income generation, as getting their arts and crafts and events and shows out there. It's been a game changer. So that's what we're looking to replicate with Arts Central. Our arts development officer has been doing a lot of work tying into different groups. So, for example, there's a lot of complementary work that's happening at the moment with the Makerspace, which is also based in Berry Library. So this is an opportunity for folks to come into the library. They can use laser cutting, they can use 3D printing, they can use CAD design, they can create tote bags, they can do all sorts of wonderful things and express themselves in different ways. And that's working with the arts group to help them, as that being a new medium to develop things. That carries on the work that we do in our schools, for example, with a lot of the new modern design tech stuff that we do in our high schools. And some of the community groups, and then branching out to different types of exhibitions that we do at Arts Central as well, and bringing those exhibitions outside of that particular space. So yes, they will always be there, but I want to see more of the community's art in my libraries. I want to see it being on show, you know, in different corners of the Vale, to make sure that it's more accessible. We've been really successful this year with accessing some grants from the Arts Council Wales, for example, to bring some of that stuff to fruition. So that's been able to give us some capacity to do that. We're also really hopeful for some of the Stronger Communities grant, an SPF grant that we can get as a local authority to bring new technologies and new types of stuff into those gallery spaces. So, for example, with Art Central specifically, a 3D arts space, so projections on the wall and more of an immersive space, kind of like what you have in some of the galleries in Bristol, for example. That brings a new type of clientele in there, and I think working in tandem with some of the stuff that we do in the library, we have hundreds of thousands of people who come into the Bury Library, and only a small fraction of that traverse the glass wall into Art Central. So that's got to change. So part of that feasibility study is how do we link in with those groups and create an offer that they want to come and feel invited into. So I was speaking with my cultural and an arts manager the other day, and again, I'm lining myself for all kinds of work here, but there's a report that we're putting together to bring to this committee to talk about Old Hall, to talk about the Pavilion, to talk about Art Central, and to talk about some of the arts development work that we're doing, because it is a really exciting time in that space. So thanks for asking the question. I hope that helps.
And thank you for your answer, Trevor. And if it widens access, and I'm really interested in the immersive arts as well. I've been dying to go to one of those shows anyway. But I did have another question, and that was around the Ysgol Sant Curig Nature Neighbours project. So obviously I used to use that hockey pitch because I was a hockey player. So I wanted to know, what's the current state of play? And if possible, could we visit that space to see, I want to see how it's developed into a nature reserve, if possible. So that was one of the things that I'm requesting.
That's not something I can answer for you right now, but I can take that away and get the right person to make those arrangements. That's no problem.
All right. Lovely. Thank you very much, Trevor. Diolch.
No worries.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Helen. Councillor Hodges.
Hi, good evening. Nice to be here. I had a bit of trouble getting in at the start, but I'm here now. Being that this is a 5-year plan, and I understand that, it's the is there any future thought to tackling the inevitable rises in child and adult poverty due to the UK government changes in benefits and the cutting of grant funding? We've had a bit of a discussion here about poverty and how we can counteract that here in the Vale of Glamorgan. I just wondered if it's part and parcel of any thought that the council is currently having. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. This Directorate Plan for Learning and Skills obviously is part of one of 5 Directorate plans in relation to the new Vale 2030. But the Directorate Plan is an in-year delivery plan, so it's only references actions and activities of strategic importance to us for delivery in year. So given the changing landscape at the moment, what we tend to do each year is linked in with our directorate plans. You have annual self-assessment process. So things like the changing kind of risk landscape, changes in policy, and obviously government decision making will influence some of what we look at and translate into any potential improvement priorities going forward. And that happens across all the directorates. So anything like that would feature as part of those considerations. And the 2030 plan does take into account a significant focus around poverty. So just so it may not feature within this directorate plan this year as a strong emphasis, there is an emphasis, as I mentioned, the community focused schools has an aspect to link with poverty. But when you read the directorate plans collectively, as part of a jigsaw that comes together, you'll see there is a strong focus around poverty generally as part of the plan, but it's only an in-year delivery plan, this directorate plan, that is contributing towards one of the 5 years of the Vale 2030. Does that kind of make sense?
No, I'm grateful for that. It's going to be, I think, an ever-increasing call on our time as a council in years to come, and I look forward and hope to get involved in that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. I can't see any other hands up at the moment, so I've just got a quick question about the targets contained within. So, for example, on page 34, percentage of secondary school children who report they feel engaged and they have a voice about services and decisions that matter to them. And then it says the target is not applicable. There doesn't seem to be a target, albeit it's a new entry, but there's no target applicable. That would seem to me something that could fairly easily have a target associated to it. So I was just curious as to why that particular one didn't have a target, and also generally the logic behind setting targets or not setting them.
Yeah, so in terms of this measure, and the same for a few others you'll notice in the directorate plan, where it says new for 25-26, we're generally advised through our corporate colleagues that we establish baselines, because we don't know what the state of affairs is. We don't know what the situation is in terms of how we benchmark. So that's the reason why a target's not set. So it's set as almost like a benchmarking year to establish the measure, to see where we're at as a litmus test. So then for future years then, so into years 2, 3 and onwards, as part of the 2030 plan, we'll have a baseline assessment of performance against this in order to look at targets. The difficulty with that particular one you've just mentioned is it is part of the wider Make Your Mark kind of conversations that happen across the youth service, where they engage with the secondary schools predominantly as part of that kind of engagement activity. So it's very much a basis of, it's more of a metric or a gauge around that and the feedback from young people. So it's quite difficult then to set a target against something that's an opinion-based metric, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And so for the other ones then, just briefly, there was no intent to give an estimate perhaps for what the target might be. It's just a case of see how it goes this year and then set one. Yeah,
pretty much. I mean, a lot of them which are kind of more opinion-based metrics, you will struggle to put a finger in the air and pin a target down. And also because we want to see by baselining this year how we perform against that, to give us an idea of setting something realistic, because part of target setting is to be obviously stretching but realistic in what we're setting. Putting in a target this year may be an arbitrary thing if we're way off the mark potentially, and then get judged based on that, where actually isn't a true reflection of maybe where we are and how we're progressing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Okay, thanks for that, Julia. Thanks. So I'm very conscious there's been a lot of comments and suggested changes and areas where we'd like further consideration given. And I think all of the comments raised here tonight are worthy of that further consideration. So if we note the report and then refer on the comments made to the Corporate Resources Committee, which will then be bundled into a composite reference with all the other thoughts from committees, I think that would be really valuable if I'd be able to have a seconder for that. Councillor Good, John and Payne, thank you very much. And then we look forward to seeing what comes out at the other end. So thanks very much, everyone, for your contributions tonight. And I'll see you again at the next committee meeting. Nosta.